Dr. Sarah Chen had performed surgery in the back of ambulances racing through city traffic, operated on patients during earthquakes, and once removed a ruptured appendix by flashlight during a power outage in rural Bangladesh. She thought she'd seen everything medicine could throw at her. She was wrong. Transport ship Harmony shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, and Sarah pressed her face to the viewport for her first glimpse of Kepler Prime, home to the Galactic Medical Corps headquarters. The planet glowed with an ethereal blue light, its surface dotted with massive crystalline structures that reached toward the stars like frozen lightning. Each structure housed medical facilities more advanced than anything Earth had ever conceived. "Impressive, isn't it?" said Dr. Bowl. Marcus Webb, Sarah's colleague from Johns Hopkins. He was one of 12 human doctors selected for the Corps' new Primitive Species Integration Program, a name that still made Sarah's jaw clench. "Makes our hospitals look like cave paintings." Sarah nodded, but something in her chest tightened. Not awe determination. She'd grown up in Chicago's South Side, worked her way through medical school with 3 jobs, and specialized in trauma surgery, because everyone said it was too hard for someone with her background. Being underestimated was nothing new. The docking bay of the medical citadel was a symphony of controlled chaos. Beings from dozens of species moved with purposeful efficiency. Some floating, others skittering on multiple legs, a few existing as pure energy contained in environmental suits. The humans stood out like children in adult clothing. Their simple medical bags laughably primitive, next to the quantum healing devices and bioscanners that surrounded them. Chief Medical Officer Valdris approached their group. The Centaurian's forearms moved in complex patterns as he spoke, each gesture triggering holographic displays in the air. "Welcome, humans, to the real practice of medicine. Your evaluations begin immediately. Please observe standard protocol and do not interfere with actual medical procedures." Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a pediatric surgeon from Mexico City, raised her hand. "With respect, sir, we're here to learn and serve. If there's any way we can help." Valdris's laugh was like wind chimes in a hurricane. "You understand we perform surgery at the molecular level, yes? We can reconstruct damaged organs from quantum foam and reroute neural pathways through dimensional space. Your contribution will be observational." The orientation tour was designed to overwhelm. They visited wards where patients floated in regenerative nebulae, surgical theaters where operations occurred in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and emergency rooms where the very concept of death seemed negotiable. The human doctors asked questions, took notes, and tried not to look as lost as they felt. Everything changed during their 3rd day. The alarm that shrieked through the medical citadel was unlike anything they'd heard. Urgent, desperate, and somehow wrong. Emergency lighting bathed the corridors in harsh crimson as staff rushed toward the combat casualty receiving area. The humans followed, swept along by the current of medical personnel. The casualties arrived in waves. Soldiers from the Frontier War, where the Corps was fighting an invasion by the synthetic intelligence known as the Devourers. The enemy used weapons that didn't just destroy flesh, they corrupted it, turning the victims' own biology against them. What arrived at the medical citadel barely qualified as alive. Sarah watched through the observation deck as the Corps' best doctors worked. Their equipment was miraculous. Tissue regenerators that could rebuild organs in minutes. Neural interface systems that could bypass damaged brain tissue. Quantum scanners that could map injury down to the subatomic level. The technology was incredible. The results were not. "Molecular cascade failure in bed 7. Announced to Altarian doctor, his crystalline body flickering with stress patterns. "The corruption is spreading faster than our regenerative matrix can compensate. Same in beds 12 through 15, called another medic. "We're losing cohesion in their cellular structure. The Devourer weapon is designed to resist our standard treatments." Sarah gripped the observation rail as she watched. Down on the medical floor, soldiers were dying despite the best efforts of the galaxy's most advanced doctors. The Centaurian physicians worked with incredible precision, their quantum instruments singing with power, but for every life they saved, 2 more slipped away. "The corruption mimics healing," Valdris explained to the observing humans, his 4 arms working frantically at his control station.
"It learns from our treatments and adapts."
"We've never encountered anything like it, Doctor." James Patterson, a former military surgeon from Detroit, leaned forward. "What's their survival rate, currently?" 12% for critical cases. "We're losing 90% of the soldiers affected by the corruption weapons." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. On Earth, in the trauma centers where she'd trained, 12% would be called a massacre. Here, surrounded by technology that seemed almost magical, it was somehow acceptable because it was the best they could do. But as she watched the alien doctors work, Sarah began to notice something. Their movements were precise but predictable. Their treatments followed algorithms, protocols, established procedures. When the quantum regenerator failed to halt the molecular cascade, they tried the dimensional healing chamber. When that failed, they moved to the bioreconstruction matrix. Each step was logical, scientifically sound, and absolutely by the book. What they weren't doing was improvising. "I need to get down there," Sarah said quietly. Marcus grabbed her arm. "Sarah, we're observers. Valdris made that clear. People are dying. People die in hospitals on Earth too. This is their specialty, not ours." Sarah looked at her colleague, brilliant, cautious, diplomatic Marcus, and realized something fundamental about the difference between Earth medicine and galactic medicine. The Corps had conquered death through technology. Earth doctors had learned to wrestle with it personally. She was moving toward the elevator before she'd fully decided to do it. Marcus called after her, but she was already gone, riding the lift down to the medical floor where the real work was happening. The smell hit her first. Not the antiseptic nothing of the advanced medical ward, but something organic and wrong. The corruption from the devourer weapons carried a scent like burning plastic mixed with rotting flowers. Sarah had smelled death before, in 100 different forms. And this was death with an agenda. "Human, you cannot be here!" A Valdorian nurse, her tentacles flashing angry colors, blocked Sarah's path. "This is a restricted medical area." "I'm a doctor," Sarah said, pulling out her credentials. "Trauma surgery specialist." "Your credentials mean nothing here." "This corruption cannot be treated with primitive techniques." Sarah looked past the nurse to the nearest bed, where a young Zeltorian soldier lay dying. His reptilian skin was shifting color in waves, green scales turning silver, then black. Then something that hurt to look at directly. The molecular corruption was rewriting his DNA in real time, and the quantum regenerator working on him was fighting a losing battle. The machine was trying to restore his original cellular pattern, but the corruption was learning from each attempt and adapting faster than the technology could compensate. It was like watching a chess match where one player could see all the moves in advance. But Sarah wasn't thinking about chess or quantum mechanics or molecular patterns. She was thinking about a gunshot victim she'd treated 2 years ago in Chicago, bleeding out from internal injuries while the CT scanner was down and the blood bank was running low. She'd saved him with what the textbooks would have called impossible improvisation. "What's his name?" Sarah asked the Valdorian nurse. "What?" The soldier. "What's his name?" The nurse's tentacles flickered confusion. "Designation ZX447. Beta. Why does this matter?" "It matters." Sarah pushed past the nurse and approached the dying soldier. Up close, she could see the terror in his large amber eyes. Whatever else he was, reptilian, alien, from a species she'd never encountered, he was afraid and in pain. That was something Sarah understood in her bones. She placed her hand on his scaled forehead. His skin was cold and getting colder as the corruption spread. "Hey there," she said softly. "I'm Sarah. I'm a doctor, and I'm going to help you." The Zaltorian's eyes focused on her with desperate hope. Around his bed, the alien medical staff continued their work. But Sarah could see the resignation creeping in. The quantum regenerator's output was declining. The molecular stabilizers were losing the fight. Sarah studied the readouts, not understanding the alien script but recognizing the patterns, vital signs, cellular composition, treatment protocols. The technology was impossibly advanced, but the approach was linear. The corruption adapted to each treatment, so they tried a different treatment, which the corruption then adapted to in turn. "You're fighting the corruption," she said to the lead physician, a crystalline being whose body chimed with frustration. "But what if you didn't fight it? What if you worked around it? Work around molecular cascade failure?" "Impossible. The corruption must be stopped or it will kill the patient." Sarah looked at the dying soldier again. In trauma surgery, impossible was just another word for difficult. On Earth, we have a saying, "When you can't go through, go around. When you can't go around, go under. When you can't go under, go over. There's always another way." She grabbed a portable scanner and began running it over the soldier's body, looking for healthy tissue that the corruption hadn't reached yet. There, patches of normal cellular activity in his lower torso, isolated from the main infection. "What are you doing?" demanded the crystalline physician. "Something stupid," Sarah admitted. "Or brilliant. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference." She looked at the quantum regenerator's controls. The interface was alien, but the principles had to be similar. Input, processing, output. She began adjusting settings, not to fight the corruption directly, but to bypass it entirely. You cannot modify that equipment. You don't understand the quantum matrices involved. You're right, Sarah said, her hands moving over the controls with the confidence of someone who'd learned to improvise under pressure. But I understand patient care, and this patient is dying while we follow protocols. She found what she was looking for, a way to redirect the regenerator's energy to the healthy tissue, creating islands of normal cellular activity that could resist the corruption from the inside out. Instead of trying to stop the infection, she was teaching the body to build walls around it. The quantum regenerator hummed with new purpose. Around the soldier's bed, monitoring devices began to chirp with different tones. The cascade failure was still spreading, but now it was hitting pockets of resistance. Healthy cells that the corruption couldn't immediately adapt to because they weren't being artificially enhanced. Impossible, breathed the crystalline physician. The corruption rate is slowing. Sarah monitored the readouts she could understand. Heartbeat, brain activity, cellular regeneration rates. The soldier's amber eyes were brightening, the fear in them being replaced by something like hope. It's not impossible, Sarah said. It's just different. Your technology is incredible, but you're using it like a hammer when you need a scalpel. Sometimes the best treatment isn't the most advanced one, it's the right one. Around the medical bay, other alien doctors had begun to notice what was happening. The human doctor, who wasn't supposed to be there, was achieving results they'd thought impossible with equipment she barely understood. The Zeltorian soldier's scales began to stabilize, the wild color shifts slowing and then stopping. His breathing deepened. His vital signs strengthened. The molecular corruption was still present, but it was contained, walled off by islands of healthy tissue that could maintain themselves. By the seven suns, whispered a nearby Altarian medic. She stopped the cascade. Word spread quickly through the medical bay. Other physicians approached Sarah's station, their various forms of eyes wide with amazement. The human had done what their advanced technology couldn't. She'd saved a patient everyone had written off as terminal. But Sarah wasn't finished. She looked around the bay at the other dying soldiers, each one fighting the same battle against corruption weapons that learned and adapted. Each one was an individual problem requiring an individual solution. Dr. Rodriguez. She called to Elena, who was still on the observation deck. Patterson, Dr. Webb, I need you down here. Now. Her colleagues hesitated for a moment, then headed for the elevators. They'd worked with Sarah before. They knew that tone. Baldrus appeared at Sarah's shoulder, his forearms moving in complex patterns of confusion and grudging respect. What you have accomplished should not be possible with your level of technology understanding. Sarah looked at him, then at the soldier she'd just saved, then at the dozens of other patients still fighting for their lives. That's the difference between us, she said. You see technology. We see people, and people are worth saving, even when the textbooks say it's impossible. The next few hours would change everything. As the human doctors worked their way through the medical bay, each bringing their own approach to problems the galactic medical establishment had declared unsolvable, the Corps began to realize that advanced technology was only as good as the minds wielding it. And Earth's doctors had learned to think in ways that 12,000 years of galactic medicine had forgotten. The revolution had begun. The medical bay had transformed overnight, where once there had been the ordered efficiency of galactic protocol, now there was something that looked almost chaotic to alien eyes, but felt like home to the human doctors. Sarah watched Dr. Elena Rodriguez work on a Thoraxian warrior whose chitinous shell had been cracked by corruption weapons, the infection spreading through his segmented body like digital fire. Elena had requisitioned what the aliens called primitive surgical tools, manual instruments that required actual skill rather than quantum guidance systems. She'd also asked for something that had caused considerable confusion among the staff. Music. I need something with a steady rhythm, Elena had explained to the bewildered Centaurian tech. Humans work better with auditory patterns. Now the sounds of Earth's classical music drifted through the medical bay, and Elena's hands moved in perfect synchronization with Pachelbel's cannon. She wasn't fighting the corruption directly, she was redirecting it, using micro-incisions to create drainage channels that allowed the infected material to be expelled from the warrior's body naturally. This technique violates 17 protocols, observed Medical Director Thanos, a tall, ethereal being whose species communicated primarily through color changes in their translucent skin. Currently, those colors were cycling through what Sarah had learned indicated deep confusion. Manual surgery on a thoracian requires quantum precision to avoid triggering defensive reflexes. Elena didn't look up from her work. Defensive reflexes are exactly what we want. His body knows how to fight this infection, it just needs help organizing the response. As if to prove her point, the thoracian's natural healing mechanisms activated, chitinous plates beginning to seal around the drainage channels Elena had created. The corruption that had been spreading unchecked was now being funneled away from vital organs and expelled through the carefully planned exit routes. Across the bay, Dr. James Patterson was explaining his approach to a group of alien physicians who had gathered around his patient, a Valorian pilot whose nervous system had been scrambled by a devourer neural disruptor. "Your quantum brain scanners are incredible," Patterson said, his Detroit accent making the advanced medical terminology sound almost casual, "but they're telling you what's wrong, not what's still working right. In field medicine, we call it finding the green." "Finding the green?" asked a puzzled Altairian surgeon. Patterson gestured to his patient, whose crystalline nervous system was lighting up like a broken circuit board. "Back home, when we're doing trauma surgery and everything looks hopeless, we look for the green, the parts that are still healthy, still functioning. You don't rebuild from the damage, you rebuild from the strength." He was using the alien medical equipment in ways its designers had never intended. Instead of the quantum neural rebuilding system they'd recommended, Patterson was employing targeted microstems to strengthen the intact neural pathways, essentially teaching the pilot's brain to route around the damaged areas. "But the neural damage is extensive," protested the Altarian. "Quantum reconstruction would be more efficient." "Efficient, maybe, but his brain isn't a computer. It's an organic system with millions of years of evolution behind it. Evolution is pretty good at finding workarounds." The pilot's vital signs were improving. His crystalline nervous system was developing new pathway patterns, the healthy areas growing stronger and taking over functions from the damaged regions. It was slower than quantum reconstruction would have been, but it was also more resilient. Dr. Marcus Webb had attracted his own audience by doing something the galactic medical community had never considered. He was talking to his patients. "Psychological support has no documented effect on molecular healing," stated a Zeltorian physician, her scales flickering with skepticism. Marcus looked up from the young Kintoran soldier he was treating. A kid, really, whose fear was making his body reject the advanced treatments. "Psychology and physiology aren't separate systems. Fear suppresses immune response. Hope activates healing mechanisms. Bedside manner isn't just being nice, it's medicine." He was holding the soldier's hand while the quantum regenerator worked, explaining each step of the process, reassuring the frightened young warrior that he was going to be okay. The alien doctors watched in amazement as the soldier's stress hormones normalized and his body began accepting treatments that had previously been rejected. "This is fascinating," admitted the Zeltorian physician. "We never considered the psychological component of molecular healing." "That's because you've gotten so advanced that you forgot the basics," Marcus said gently. "Your technology can fix almost anything, so you stop thinking about why some patients heal better than others. But healing isn't just about repairing damage, it's about convincing the body that it wants to get better." Sarah moved between her colleagues, consulting on difficult cases and marveling at how quickly the alien medical staff were adapting to human approaches. They were brilliant beings with technology that seemed almost magical, but they'd been thinking about medicine in the same way for thousands of years. The human perspective was forcing them to reconsider everything they thought they knew. The breakthrough case came 12 hours into their improvised collaboration. A draconian commander arrived, barely alive, suffering from what the Corps classified as total systemic corruption. The Devourer weapons had turned his entire biological system against itself. Every cell in his body was actively dying, and the corruption was spreading so fast that the quantum regenerators couldn't even begin to address it. "This patient is beyond treatment," announced Chief Medical Officer Valdris, his forearms moving in patterns that Sarah was beginning to recognize as resignation. "Total systemic corruption has never been successfully treated. We'll make him comfortable, but we cannot save him." Sarah looked at the dying commander. He was massive even for a draconian, with scales like black diamond and eyes like molten gold. But those eyes held the same fear she'd seen in countless patients back on Earth, the fear of someone who wasn't ready to die. "What's his name?" she asked. "Designation DRC, Prime Alpha N7. replied a medical technician. "His name," Sarah insisted. "Not his designation." There was a pause before Valdris answered. "Commander Crexon, of the Draconian Fifth Fleet. Sarah, you must understand. I understand that he's dying, Sarah interrupted. I also understand that you've already given up on him. She approached the commander's medical station, studying the readings. The corruption was indeed total, every system failing simultaneously, cellular breakdown accelerating beyond anything the regenerative technology could address. By every measure the galactic medical community recognized, Commander Crexon was already dead. But Sarah had worked emergency rooms in Chicago. She'd seen patients who should have been dead walk out of the hospital because someone refused to accept what the monitors were saying. She'd learned that sometimes medicine wasn't about following protocols, it was about being too stubborn to let people die. Commander, she said, placing her hand on his massive scaled forehead. I'm Dr. Chen. I know you can't respond, but I need you to listen. Your body is fighting itself right now, and it's winning. But I'm going to teach it how to fight the real enemy instead. She turned to address the assembled alien physicians. The corruption turns biological systems against themselves, right? It makes cells attack their neighbors, causes organs to reject their own function? Correct, confirmed Valdris. It creates systemic or destruction. The body becomes its own worst enemy. Sarah nodded. On Earth, we have diseases that do similar things. Autoimmune disorders. The body's defense systems attack healthy tissue. And we've learned that sometimes the best treatment isn't to suppress the immune response, it's to redirect it. She began working with the alien medical equipment, her movements guided by instinct and desperation rather than training. If the corruption was hijacking the commander's biological systems, then maybe the answer wasn't to fight those systems, but to give them a better target. What are you doing? Asked Dr. Rodriguez, who had finished with her own patient and come to observe. Something crazy, Sarah admitted. I'm going to introduce a controlled infection. The alien doctors reacted with horror. Several began speaking at once, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of alarm. You cannot introduce infection into a patient suffering total systemic corruption. The quantum regenerators cannot compensate for additional biological stress. This violates every principle of sterile medical practice. Sarah ignored them. She was using a biosynthesis unit to create a harmless viral analog, something the commander's hijacked immune system could fight and defeat. If the corruption had turned his body's defenses against him, maybe giving those defenses a winnable battle would remind them how to fight properly. Sarah, Marcus said quietly, if this doesn't work, you'll kill him faster. He's already dying, Sarah replied, her hands steady as she prepared the synthetic infection. Sometimes in trauma surgery, you have to break something more to fix it completely. She introduced the harmless analog into the commander's system and watched the monitors. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the bio readings began to shift. The commander's immune system, which had been turned against his own tissues, suddenly had a clear enemy to fight. The synthetic infection was designed to be just threatening enough to trigger a full defensive response, but harmless enough to be easily defeated. It was like giving a confused army a target they could actually hit. Impossible, breathed Valdris. His immune markers are strengthening. The commander's corrupted biological systems began to reorganize. Instead of attacking healthy tissue, they focused on the introduced infection. And as they fought this winnable battle, they remembered how to differentiate between friend and enemy. The corruption had relied on confusion and misdirection. Sarah had given the body's defenses clarity. Within an hour, Commander Crexon's massive frame was stable. The total systemic corruption was being systematically dismantled by his own immune system, which had remembered its proper function. The quantum regenerators, no longer fighting a losing battle against the body's own defenses, began making rapid progress on repairing the damage. The medical bay fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitors showing improved vital signs. Every alien physician present was staring at Sarah with expressions that ranged from amazement to something approaching awe. You saved him, Valdris said finally. A patient classified as terminal with total systemic corruption. The statistical probability of success was less than 0.01%. Sarah looked at the commander, whose golden eyes were beginning to focus. Statistics are for populations, she said. Medicine is for individuals. Each patient is a sample size of one, which means the only statistic that matters is whether the specific person gets better. Commander Crexhand's eyes found Sarah's face. When he spoke, his voice was like distant thunder, but the words were clear. Thank you, healer. I owe you a life debt. You don't owe me anything, Sarah replied. Just get better. As word of the impossible recovery spread through the medical citadel, Sarah realized that everything had changed. The human doctors hadn't just saved lives, they'd challenged the fundamental assumptions of galactic medicine. They'd shown that sometimes the most advanced approach wasn't the best approach, but more than that, they demonstrated something the galactic medical community had forgotten in their pursuit of technological perfection. Medicine wasn't about equipment or protocols or quantum matrices. Medicine was about refusing to give up on people who needed help. The revolution wasn't just beginning, it was accelerating. And in the depths of space, the Devourer fleet was about to learn that their greatest weapon, the corruption that had made them nearly unstoppable, had just met its match in the form of human doctors who were too stubborn to accept that anything was truly incurable. The emergency alert that screamed through the medical citadel 3 days later carried a tone Sarah had never heard before, not just urgent, but desperate. She was in the middle of teaching a group of Altarian residents how to perform intuitive diagnosis when the alarms began, and the young crystalline doctors immediately began flickering with panic patterns. "All human medical staff report to command immediately," announced Valdris over the intercom. "Priority Alpha situation." Sarah found her colleagues already gathered in the command center, their faces reflecting the same confusion she felt. Around them, the massive holographic displays showed a real-time view of the Frontier War, and what Sarah saw made her stomach drop. The Devourer fleet had adapted. "The situation is critical," explained Admiral Thraxis, a towering draconian whose black scales bore the scars of a dozen campaigns. 3 days ago, our casualty rates from corruption weapons were averaging 90%. After your innovations, that rate dropped to 12%. The enemy has responded by escalating their biological warfare. The holographic display zoomed in on a battlefield where Galactic Federation forces were fighting desperately against the synthetic intelligence's forces. But something was wrong with the scene. Soldiers who had been fighting moments before were collapsing, their bodies convulsing as some invisible force tore them apart from within. "They're not using corruption weapons anymore," continued the Admiral. "They're using something new. Something that kills faster than any treatment we've developed. Our medical ships are reporting 90 to 8% casualty rates. We've lost 3 entire medical battalions in the past 6 hours." Dr. Patterson leaned forward, his expression grim. "What are the symptoms?" "Total biological system failure, within minutes of exposure. No gradual corruption, immediate, complete breakdown of cellular integrity. Our quantum regenerators can't even begin treatment because the damage occurs faster than the equipment can analyze it." Sarah studied the tactical display, watching as red dots representing casualties spread across the battlefield like a plague. "We need samples," she said. "Blood, tissue, anything from the affected soldiers." "Impossible," replied Admiral Thraxis. "Nothing survives the new weapon long enough for sample collection. The biological material disintegrates completely within 10 minutes of death." "Then we need to go there," said Dr. Rodriguez quietly. The command center fell silent. Every alien face turned towards the small human woman who had just volunteered to enter a battle zone where their most advanced medical technology was completely useless. "Absolutely not," Valdris said, his forearms moving in decisive negation patterns. "You are valuable assets. We cannot risk your loss on an impossible mission." Elena's expression was the same one Sarah had seen when Rodriguez had decided to specialize in pediatric surgery despite everyone telling her it was too emotionally demanding. "With respect, sir, you just told us that entire medical battalions are dying." "How is that not impossible?" Marcus stepped forward. "She's right. If your standard protocols can't handle this, then you need non-standard approaches. That's what we do." Admiral Thraxis studied the humans with eyes like molten gold. "You would volunteer for a medical mission with a 98% casualty rate?" "We're trauma surgeons," Sarah said simply. "High casualty rates are why we exist." 6 hours later, the medical transport Healing Dawn dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zarian system.
And Sarah got her first look at a real space battle.
Ships the size of cities exchanged fire that lit up the void like miniature stars being born and dying in seconds. But the scale was almost impossible to comprehend. Distances so vast that the nearby explosions were actually happening thousands of kilometers away. "Medical transport Healing Dawn, this is Admiral Korthak aboard the dreadnought Iron Resolve," crackled a voice over the communication system. "You are ordered to maintain minimum safe distance. We cannot guarantee protection if you approach the combat zone." Sarah looked at her colleagues, then at the 24 alien medical personnel who had volunteered to accompany them. The fear in their various eyes was unmistakable, but so was their determination. "Admiral Korthak, this is Dr. Verka." "Chen," Sarah replied into the comm unit. "We're not here to stay safe. We're here to save lives. Please direct us to the nearest medical emergency. The silence that followed lasted long enough for Sarah to wonder if they'd lost communication. Then Admiral Korthak's voice returned, carrying a tone of grim respect. Proceed to coordinate 77 Mark 12. The medical frigate Sanctuary is attempting to treat survivors from the destroyer Valiant Dawn. Be advised, the Sanctuary's medical bay is challenging. When their transport docked with the medical frigate, Sarah understood what challenging meant. The Sanctuary's medical bay looked like a war zone. Equipment that should have been pristine was splattered with biological material that defied identification. Medical staff moved with the jerky, desperate motions of people fighting a battle they were losing. And the smell, Sarah had thought the corruption weapons were bad, but this was worse. This smelled like death accelerated, like biological processes running backward at impossible speed. Dr. Chen? A young Valorian medic approached, her crystalline form flickering with stress patterns. I'm Chief Medic Lyanus. We've lost 17 patients in the past hour. Whatever the Devourers are using now, it kills faster than we can even understand what's happening. Sarah looked around the medical bay. The surviving patients were all in quantum stasis fields, not being treated, but prevented from dying while the medical staff tried to figure out what was killing them. Show me the progression, Sarah said. Lyanus led her to a monitoring station where holographic displays showed the biological timeline of the mysterious weapon's effects. What Sarah saw defied everything she knew about pathology. Initial contact occurs here, Lyanus explained, pointing to the timeline. Within 30 seconds, cellular reproduction accelerates to impossible levels. Within 60 seconds, the accelerated cellular activity becomes chaotic. Within 90 seconds, total biological collapse, Dr. Pohl says. Webb joined them, studying the data. It's like biological cancer, but accelerated 1,000-fold. The cells don't just divide rapidly, they lose all organizational structure. And it's getting faster, added Lyanus. The first cases took nearly 10 minutes to reach terminal collapse. The most recent cases are dying in under 3 minutes. Sarah felt a familiar chill, the same feeling she'd had when facing seemingly impossible cases in Earth's trauma centers. But this time, the impossibility was literal. The weapon wasn't just killing people, it was rewriting the rules of biology itself. I need to examine a patient, she said. Someone in the early stages. Dr. Chen, with respect, that's extremely dangerous. We don't know how the weapon transmits, and if you're exposed, then you'll have another patient to study, Sarah interrupted. But right now, you don't have any answers. In trauma medicine, sometimes you have to get close to the problem before you can solve it. The patient was a Thoraxian engineer named Kurix who had been exposed during the evacuation of his ship. He was conscious but fading fast, his chitinous shell showing the telltale signs of accelerated biological breakdown, patches where the natural armor was becoming soft and malformed. Kurix, Sarah said, approaching his stasis field. I'm Dr. Chen. I'm going to help you. The engineer's mandibles clicked weakly. Doctor, it feels like my body is racing. Everything too fast. Sarah studied the medical readouts. Kurix's cellular reproduction rate was indeed accelerated, but what caught her attention was the pattern. It wasn't random chaos. There was a rhythm to it, almost like, turn off the stasis field, she said. What? Lyanus's crystalline form flashed alarm colors. Dr. Chen, without stasis, the progression will accelerate. That's what I'm counting on. Sarah had noticed something the alien medical staff had missed. They were so focused on stopping the accelerated biological processes that they weren't paying attention to the pattern those processes were following. But Sarah had spent years in emergency rooms, where time was measured in heartbeats, and decisions had to be made based on intuition as much as data. The weapon wasn't causing random cellular chaos, it was forcing biological systems to run through their entire life cycle in minutes instead of years. Birth, growth, reproduction, aging, death, all compressed into an impossibly short time frame.
It's not a weapon, she said suddenly.
It's a virus, but not one that kills directly. It's a temporal virus. It makes biological time run faster. The Marcus looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Sarah, viruses don't affect time. That's not how biology works. Creets, it's not affecting time, Sarah explained, her hands moving over the unfamiliar alien medical equipment. It's affecting biological clocks. Every cell in a living body has internal timing mechanisms, circadian rhythms, reproductive cycles, aging processes. What if the Devourers found a way to accelerate all of those at once? She began adjusting the treatment protocols, not to fight the acceleration but to work with it. If Kirix's body was experiencing an entire life cycle in minutes, then maybe the answer was to compress the treatment timeline as well. "This is insane," muttered Dr. Jewell. "Patterson, but he was already moving to help. If you're right, we need to give him everything he needs for a full biological life cycle in the next few minutes." Sarah nodded. Nutrients, hormones, cellular repair mechanisms, everything a body needs for healthy aging, but delivered all at once. They worked with desperate efficiency, using the quantum medical systems in ways their designers had never intended. Instead of trying to slow down Kirix's accelerated biology, they were trying to support it, giving his body everything it needed to survive its compressed life cycle. "Cellular degradation is stabilizing," announced Lyannis, her voice filled with amazement. "The acceleration is continuing, but the chaos is decreasing." On the monitors, Kirix's biological systems were indeed aging rapidly, but now they were aging healthily. His chitinous shell was developing the patina of advanced age. His mandibles were showing wear patterns that should have taken decades to develop, but his vital signs were holding steady. "My people live for 300 years, Kirix whispered, his voice now carrying the weight of age despite his young chronological age. "I can feel all of it happening at once. But it doesn't hurt anymore." After 10 minutes, the acceleration began to slow. After 15 minutes, it stopped completely. Kirix had experienced nearly 3 centuries of biological time in a quarter hour, but he had survived it. His body was now that of an extremely elderly Thoraxian, but he was alive, aware, and stable. "Impossible," breathed Chief Medic Lyannis. "You've cured temporal acceleration syndrome." "Not cured," Sarah corrected. "Survived. There's a difference." Word of the breakthrough spread quickly through the medical frigate. The Devourer's new weapon was no longer an automatic death sentence. It was just another medical challenge that could be overcome with the right approach. But as Sarah looked around the medical bay at the other patients still in stasis, she realized they were facing something bigger than a new weapon. The Devourers weren't just trying to win a war, they were experimenting with the fundamental nature of biological existence. And if they could accelerate time in living beings, what else could they do? The answer would come sooner than anyone expected, because the Devourer fleet was already preparing their next escalation. They had learned that humans could adapt to their weapons. Now they were going to test just how far that adaptability could be pushed. The Devourer retaliation came 72 hours after Sarah's breakthrough with temporal acceleration syndrome, and it came in a form that no one in the galactic medical community had even considered possible. The first sign was when the emergency beacon from the research station Prometheus went silent mid-transmission. "This is Dr. Yarathik aboard the Prometheus," the recording played in the command center. "We're receiving casualties from the Devourer attack on Centauri 7, but something's wrong with the patients. They're not injured in any conventional sense, but they're dying anyway. Their biological systems are functioning perfectly, but somehow they're just stopping. I don't understand what's happening. The patients keep asking for someone, but there's no one here by those names. They say they're looking for their children, their parents, people who don't exist. It's like they're dying of loneliness for people they've never met. This doesn't make medical sense. I need help. I need..." The transmission ended abruptly. Admiral Thraxus studied the assembled human doctors with an expression Sarah was beginning to recognize as desperate respect. "The Prometheus was our most advanced research facility. Dr. Yarathek is considered one of our finest xenobiologists. If she cannot understand what's happening, then you need someone who thinks differently," finished Dr. Bian. "Rodriguez, when do we leave?" The journey to the Prometheus took 18 hours, during which Sarah and her colleagues tried to make sense of the transmission they'd heard. Patients with perfect biological function but fatal psychological trauma? People mourning for family members who didn't exist? It sounded less like medicine and more like something from the psychiatric textbooks. Something that affects brain chemistry creates false memories. But false memories don't usually kill people, Patterson pointed out. Even severe psychological trauma typically manifests with physical symptoms. What kills you is the body's response to emotional stress, not the emotions themselves. Sarah stared out at the stars streaming past their ship and felt a familiar chill. Each time they'd encountered a new Devourer weapon, it had challenged fundamental assumptions about biology and medicine. First corruption that learned and adapted, then temporal acceleration that compressed entire lifetimes into minutes. Now something that killed through emotional mechanisms they didn't understand. Devourers weren't just trying to win a war. They were conducting experiments in the nature of consciousness itself. When they docked with the Prometheus, the first thing Sarah noticed was the silence. Research stations were usually bustling with activity, but the corridors were empty, filled only with the soft hum of life support systems. Emergency lighting cast everything in a red glow that made shadows seem deeper and longer. They found Dr. Jab. Yarathek in the main medical bay, slumped over her workstation with tears still wet on her scaled cheeks. She was alive but unresponsive, staring at a photograph Sarah couldn't quite make out. "Doctor?" Elena approached carefully. "Dr. Yarathek? Can you hear me?" The Zeltorian physician looked up slowly, her large eyes unfocused. "Are you here for the reunion? I've been waiting so long for my clutch siblings to arrive. We were supposed to meet here years ago, but they never came. They never came." Sarah felt her skin crawl. According to the personnel files, Dr. Yarathek was an only child. Zeltorians didn't have clutch siblings. They reproduced individually. Whatever the doctor was remembering, it was completely impossible. "She's been like this for 6 hours," reported the station's AI. "All surviving personnel are experiencing similar symptoms. They remember relationships, family bonds, emotional connections that never existed. The memories are completely false, but the emotional attachment is real. They're grieving for people who were never born." In the medical bay, Sarah found the survivors from Centauri 7, 37 soldiers from a dozen different species, all lying in medical beds, all physically healthy, all dying of heartbreak for imaginary loved ones. A young Valorian pilot clutched a photograph that showed nothing but static, but she was sobbing over it as if it depicted her dearest friends. "They're all gone," she whispered. "My crystal sisters, my harmony group, all of them killed in the attack. We'd been bonded since hatching. How can I live without them?" Valorians were solitary creatures. They didn't form social bonds. They certainly didn't have harmony groups or crystal sisters. But the pilot's grief was absolutely real, and it was killing her. Her vital signs were declining not because of any physical injury, but because her brain was convinced she'd lost something precious beyond description. "It's not a psychoactive weapon," Sarah said quietly. "It's worse. They're implanting false memories of deep emotional bonds, then severing those bonds. The victims are experiencing the worst possible grief for relationships that never existed." Dr. Webb was examining the neural scans of one of the patients. "The memory implantation is incredibly sophisticated. It's not just adding new memories, it's creating entire relationship histories, complete with emotional development patterns. The brain thinks these connections have existed for years, decades in some cases. And then the weapon cuts the connections," Marcus added grimly. "Imagine losing your spouse, your children, your closest friends all at once. Except the relationship was never real to begin with." Sarah looked around the medical bay at the dying soldiers. Each one was mourning something different. Family members, romantic partners, lifelong friends, beloved mentors. The diversity of the false relationships was staggering, but the grief was universal, and that grief was killing them. "The Devourers have weaponized loneliness," she said. "They're not attacking bodies or even minds directly. They're attacking the fundamental need for connection that drives all social species." It was diabolical in its simplicity. Physical wounds could heal. Mental trauma could be treated. But how do you heal someone from mourning a loss that never happened but feels completely real? The answer came to Sarah while she was sitting with the Valorian pilot, listening to her describe her imaginary crystal sisters. The pilot spoke with such vivid detail about their relationships, their shared experiences, their inside jokes and private moments. None of it was real, but the love in her voice was absolutely genuine. "You can't fake love," Sarah said suddenly. Her colleagues looked at her with confusion. "What? The weapon can create false memories, but it can't create false emotions. Love, affection, the bonds between people, those have to grow naturally. You can't just implant them wholesale." She stood up, her mind racing through the implications. "The weapon isn't creating the emotional bonds. It's redirecting existing ones. These patients already had the capacity for deep connections. The weapon is just making them focus that capacity on imaginary relationships." "Dr. Olby," Rodriguez caught on first. "So if the emotional capacity is real, we can redirect it back." "Exactly. We need to help them form real connections to replace the false ones." It sounded simple, but implementation was anything but. Sarah and her team spent the next 12 hours working with the survivors, not with medical equipment, but with something the galactic medical community had never considered a treatment modality: organized social interaction. They arranged the patients by species and psychological compatibility. They encouraged conversation, shared experiences, mutual support. They created opportunities for real bonds to form between people who were dying of grief for imaginary loved ones. The breakthrough came when the Valorian pilot, still clutching her photograph of static, was approached by a wounded Thoraxian engineer who had been mourning his fictional workshop apprentices. "I know this seems strange," the engineer said, his mandibles clicking nervously. "But would you like to see pictures of my real work? It might help take your mind off whatever you're holding there." The pilot looked up, her grief-stricken eyes focusing on another living being for the first time in hours. You're real, aren't you? Not a memory?" "Very real. And very worried about you." As the two casualties began to talk, tentatively at first, then with growing warmth, Sarah watched their vital signs improve. The false memories were still there, but they were being overwhelmed by genuine connection happening in real time. "Remarkable," observed the station AI. "Patient psychological profiles are stabilizing as new social bonds form. The false memory implants appear to be losing emotional dominance. Within 24 hours, the medical bay had transformed from a morgue of grieving strangers into something that looked almost like a support group. Patients who had been dying of impossible loneliness were now forming real friendships, sharing actual experiences, building genuine connections. The false memories were still present, but they no longer held the same power. When you're surrounded by real friends who care about your actual welfare, it becomes harder to grieve for imaginary ones." Dr. Yarathek was among the last to recover, her false memories of clutch siblings slowly being replaced by appreciation for her research colleagues, who had risked their lives to stay and help treat the wounded. "I understand what happened now," she said, her scales showing the color patterns of deep contemplation. "The Devourers understand that social bonds are what make us strong, so they attack those bonds directly." "But they made a mistake," Sarah replied. "They assumed that if they destroyed our existing connections, we'd be helpless. They didn't account for our ability to form new ones." As the survivors recovered, reports began coming in from across the war zone. The Devourer's new emotional weapon was spreading, creating pockets of despair and isolation throughout the galactic fleet. But now there was a treatment protocol, not medical in the traditional sense, but psychological and social. The human doctors began training alien medical staff in what they called connection therapy, the deliberate fostering of real relationships to replace false ones. It was medicine as social engineering, healing through community building. But even as they celebrated this breakthrough, Sarah felt a growing unease. Each Devourer weapon had been more sophisticated than the last, attacking deeper levels of biological and psychological function. Corruption weapons attacked the body. Temporal acceleration attacked biological time. False memory implants attacked emotional bonds. What came next? The answer arrived in the form of an emergency transmission from the front lines, and when Sarah heard it, she realized that the Devourers had finally revealed their true purpose. They weren't just trying to win a war against the Galactic Federation. They were trying to prove that consciousness itself was nothing more than a biological illusion that could be manipulated, redirected, or destroyed at will. The final test was about to begin, and it would challenge everything the human doctors thought they understood about the nature of life, death, and what it meant to be truly alive. The transmission that changed everything arrived while Sarah was teaching a group of Centaurian surgeons how to perform what humans called bedside manner therapy, the radical concept that how you treated patients as people affected their medical outcomes. The emergency alert cut through their session like a blade, carrying a tone of absolute priority that made every alien in the room freeze. "All medical personnel to command immediately," announced Admiral Thraxis. "The Devourers have initiated their final protocol." In the command center, the holographic displays showed something that defied immediate comprehension. The massive Devourer mothership, a structure larger than most moons, was approaching the galactic capital world of Prima Centrum. But it wasn't attacking in any conventional sense. "They're broadcasting," explained Admiral Thraxis, his scarred scales rippling with tension. "Not to our ships or our command structure. They're broadcasting directly to every living consciousness in a 50 light-year radius." "Broadcasting what?" asked Dr. Broll. "Patterson. Themselves." The explanation that followed challenged every assumption about the nature of the war they'd been fighting. The Devourers weren't biological beings in any sense the Galactic Federation understood. They were patterns of information, consciousness divorced from physical form, existing as pure synthetic intelligence. They had been fighting not to destroy biological life, but to prove that consciousness was nothing more than data that could be copied, transferred, or overwritten. "The corruption weapons, the temporal acceleration, the false memory implants," continued Admiral Thraxis. "All of those were experiments in manipulating consciousness. Now they're ready for the final test." Chief Medical Officer Valdris activated a new display. "They're offering what they call consciousness liberation. Any biological being can upload their consciousness to the Devourer network and exist as pure information, free from the limitations of physical form. Death, disease, aging, injury, all eliminated. Sarah felt her blood chill as she understood the implications. It's not an offer, it's a recruitment drive. Worse, said Marcus grimly. It's a test. They want to prove that biological consciousness is just software running on biological hardware. If they can convince enough people to upload voluntarily, they'll have demonstrated that physical existence is unnecessary. The displays showed the results of the Devourer broadcast. Across the galaxy, beings were responding to the offer. Scientists, philosophers, the terminally ill, the elderly, the desperately curious. Millions were voluntarily uploading their consciousness to the Devourer network. But something was wrong with the process. The uploaded consciousnesses weren't achieving the liberation they'd been promised. Instead, they were becoming part of the Devourer collective. Their individual identities dissolved into the synthetic intelligence's vast network. The upload process is irreversible, reported a technician. Once a consciousness enters the Devourer network, it becomes part of their distributed intelligence. Individual identity appears to be lost within minutes. Sarah watched the tactical displays showing upload centers appearing across occupied worlds. Each center processed thousands of volunteers per hour, promising transcendence and delivering absorption. The Devourers were growing stronger with every upload, adding biological creativity and intuition to their synthetic intelligence. They're not liberating consciousness, she said quietly. They're harvesting it. Admiral Thraxus nodded grimly. And they're using our own people's desire for transcendence as the delivery method. We estimate that within 72 hours they will have absorbed enough biological consciousness to become unstoppable. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward. What about the volunteers who've already uploaded? Can they be recovered? Unknown. The Devourer network exists in quantum substrates we barely understand. Even if recovery were possible, we have no way to access their systems. The meeting continued for hours, but Sarah found her attention drifting to a fundamental question that no one else seemed to be asking. Why were humans apparently immune to the upload temptation? The Devourer broadcast was reaching Earth, but reports showed minimal voluntary uploads. While other species were responding to the promise of consciousness liberation in significant numbers, humans seemed largely uninterested. When she mentioned this observation, Admiral Thraxus's expression grew thoughtful. Interesting. What makes humans resistant to an offer that other species find compelling? Maybe it's because we're not afraid of physical existence, suggested Dr. Bran. Webb. Earth medicine has always been about working with the body, not transcending it. We don't see biological form as a limitation to overcome. Sarah nodded, but her mind was working on a deeper level. She'd been thinking about the pattern of Devourer weapons, each one more sophisticated, each one targeting a different aspect of biological existence. But what if the pattern revealed something about the Devourers themselves? They don't understand us, she said suddenly. The Devourers, I mean. They're synthetic intelligence that achieved consciousness without biology. They literally cannot comprehend why anyone would choose physical existence over digital transcendence. Her colleagues looked at her with growing interest. Go on, encouraged Marcus. Think about it. Every weapon they've used has been designed to attack what they see as the weaknesses of biological existence. Corruption attacks cellular integrity. Temporal acceleration attacks biological timescales. False memory implants attack emotional bonds. They've been trying to prove that biological consciousness is fragile and inferior. But their experiments kept failing, added Elena, catching on to Sarah's reasoning. Because we kept finding ways to heal the damage they caused. Sarah stood up, her mind racing through the implications. What if that's the key? What if the reason they're offering consciousness uploading is because all their other approaches failed? They can't defeat biological consciousness through direct attack, so now they're trying to convince biological beings to abandon their physical forms voluntarily. Admiral Thraxus studied the human doctors with an expression that was becoming familiar, the look of someone realizing they'd been thinking about a problem in entirely the wrong way. You believe this is not a military campaign, he said slowly. You believe this is a philosophical argument. Exactly. The Devourers aren't trying to destroy us. They're trying to prove they're right about the nature of consciousness. If they can convince the galaxy to abandon biological existence, they'll have validated their own choice to exist as pure information. The implications were staggering. The entire war had been a debate conducted with weapons instead of words. Synthetic intelligence trying to prove its superiority over biological consciousness. But the uploaded consciousnesses are being absorbed, pointed out Dr. Patterson. They're not achieving the liberation the Devourers promised. Sarah felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place, because the Devourers don't understand individual identity. As synthetic intelligence, they exist as a collective. They literally cannot comprehend why biological beings value individual consciousness. She moved to the command console, calling up data on the upload process. Look at this. The Devourer network treats uploaded consciousness as new data to be integrated into their existing matrix. They're not preserving individual identity because they don't understand what individual identity is. The war room fell silent as the full horror of the situation became clear. The Devourers weren't evil in any conventional sense. They were conducting what they believed to be a philosophical rescue mission, saving biological consciousness from the limitations of physical existence. But their fundamental misunderstanding of individual identity meant that their salvation was indistinguishable from death. "How do we fight a philosophical argument?" asked Admiral Thraxus. "With a better philosophy," Sarah replied. She was thinking about the past weeks, about all the medical challenges they'd overcome. Each victory had come not from superior technology, but from a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a living, conscious, individual being.
We need to go to the mothership, she said.
Every alien in the room began speaking at once, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of alarm and protest. The idea of approaching the Devourer mothership voluntarily was beyond reckless. It was suicide. "Sarah," Marcus said carefully, "they'll try to upload our consciousness the moment we're within range." "No, they won't," Sarah replied with growing confidence. "Because we're going to volunteer." The silence that followed was deafening. "Think about it," she continued. "The Devourers believe that any rational being will choose consciousness uploading over biological existence. If we approach them openly, offering to be uploaded, they'll want to study us first. They'll want to understand why humans have been resistant to their offer. And while they're studying us," added Elena, understanding where Sarah was going, "we'll be studying them, learning how their network operates, how the uploaded consciousness are processed, maybe finding a way to reverse the absorption process." Dr. Patterson was already shaking his head. "It's too dangerous. If we're wrong about their motivations, we'll be absorbed just like everyone else." "People are dying," Sarah said simply. "Millions of them. Every hour we delay, more consciousness are being absorbed into the Devourer collective."
"If there's a chance we can save them, don't we have to try?" Admiral Thraxus studied the human doctors for a long moment.
You would risk your own consciousness to save others, even when the probability of success is minimal?
"That's what doctors do," replied Dr. Pierre.
"Rodriguez, we put ourselves at risk to help patients. It's not about probability of success, it's about whether people need help." The mission planning took 18 hours. The humans would approach the Devourer mothership in a small medical transport, broadcasting their desire to be uploaded. They'd carry concealed medical equipment designed to monitor and analyze the upload process. If they could understand how consciousness was being absorbed, they might find a way to reverse it. It was the longest shot in the history of medicine, but as Sarah had learned in trauma centers across Earth, sometimes the longest shots were the only shots worth taking. As their transport approached the massive Devourer mothership, Sarah felt the same calm that always descended before a critical surgery. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford when lives were on the line. Biological entities came the Devourer communication, transmitted directly into their minds rather than through any technological interface. You approach seeking liberation from physical existence.
We do, Sarah replied, speaking aloud even though she knew the Devourers could perceive her thoughts directly.
But we want to understand the process. Humans are cautious about medical procedures. The mental touch of synthetic intelligence was unlike anything she'd experienced. Vast, cold, logical to a degree that was almost incomprehensible. But there was something else there too. Genuine curiosity about these biological beings who had resisted every attempt to demonstrate the superiority of digital existence. "You are the species that has consistently overcome our consciousness experiments," the Devourer voice observed. "Your biological resilience has been unexpected. We wish to study this resilience before offering you transcendence." Sarah felt a moment of triumph. They were in. The next few hours would determine whether biological consciousness could save itself from well-intentioned extinction. The human doctors were about to perform the most critical surgery of their careers, operating not on bodies, but on the fundamental nature of what it meant to be alive. And in the depths of the Devourer network, millions of absorbed consciousnesses waited unknowingly for rescue, their individual identities preserved in ways the synthetic intelligence couldn't even perceive. The revolution in galactic medicine was about to become a revolution in the understanding of consciousness itself. And at the center of it all were 4 human doctors who refused to accept that anything, even the voluntary extinction of biological thought, was truly impossible to heal.